Hello everyone, Specter here and welcome to Star Citizen. Today I would like to talk about the RSI Polaris, one of the famous concept ships that players always discuss about. I will start with the stats of the ship, then I will go through the feature and the design, as well as some of the ways that I think the Polaris can do when it's flyable. Without further ado, let's get to it. RSI Polaris is a corvette that manufactured by the Robert Space Industries. Currently, it is the smallest capital-sized combat vessel that is available on the market. Polaris is about 155 meters in length, 82 meters in width, as well as 35 meters in height. Since currently the Polaris is still in development, the size of the ship probably will be increased. For weaponries, Polaris comes up with 4 torpedo launch tubes with 28 size 10 torpedoes, the capital ship killer in total. For the turrets, the ship has a size 5 twin-mounted remote turret, 5 size 4 twin-mounted manned turrets, as well as a size 4 twin-mounted automatic turret. The Polaris also comes up with 2 size 3 missile racks that house 16 missiles each. For the systems on board, Polaris got a radar, a power plant that are in capital size, 2 shield generators, and 2 coolers that are in large size, as well as 2 medium-sized computers. For the facilities, Polaris has an armory, a brig, a hangar that can fit a small-sized vessel, which may be able to fit a larger craft in the future, a med bay, as well as a mess hall. The cargo bay of the Polaris can fit 216 SCU worth of cargo, and it also be able to fit some ground vehicles such as the Ursa rover. For the crew size, the minimal crew would be 6, while the maximum crew size would be 14, but of course more crew members probably will be needed in the future. When the Polaris is available on the website, the Warborn price would be $675 and the standalone price would be about $750. Now let's talk about the design of the ship. First of all, the turrets. 3 of the size 4 turrets are being placed at the top of the ship. Another 2 size 4 turrets are being placed at the port and starboard side, and there is a size 5 and size 4 turrets are covering the bottom part of the ship. It means that the Polaris are being well protected from different angles, except the little blind spot that located straight at the back of the ship, as there will be only 2 turrets are available to cover a bit of that area, while the other angles will be protected by at least 3 different turrets at the same time. Secondly, the Polaris bridge position is quite rare comparing to most of the capital-sized combat vessels in the game. Most of the combat ships designed in Star Citizen usually have the bridge located at the upper part of the ship to increase the awareness around the ship, and the defensive turrets will be surrounding the bridge, which is quite reasonable even for nowadays standard when people designing the combat vessels, right? But the Polaris design is to put a bridge at the front of the ship while all the turrets are mostly located around the hangar. So this design I think is good for the purpose of this ship. Since the bridge is located at the front of the ship, it will lower the ship's profile when Polaris is facing the enemy, which would decrease the chances of being hit, especially when it's performing boom and zoom tactic. Secondly, the pilot's view will not be obstructed by the ship's structure, which the pilot will have an easier time to search and aim at the targets. Thirdly, the turrets will have a better firing angle because the bridge is no longer be a kind of obstruction and blocking them from firing. Lastly, the turrets that surrounding the hangar will be able to provide better cover to the smaller craft that tries to take off and land on the ship, as they are much more vulnerable at that period of time. I believe that the main purpose of having this turret arrangement is highly related to its hit and run tactics, approaching the target with high speed, toss the torpedo, and get away, while the turrets at the mid and aft section of the ship can fire at anything that pursuing the Polaris. If you join the fleet combats in the Polaris, it's better for you not to stay in the war zone for too long. Because the Polaris, even though you got better shieldings and better armor compared to the other large-sized combat ships, but still it would be the weakest so far compared to the other capital-sized combat vessels. It can deliver a lot of heavy punches but not the design to take it, just like the battle cruisers in World War I. So what you need to do with the Polaris is to rush into the war zone once it's started, of course, deliver as much damage as you can and get out of the war zone so that you can just keep on repeating doing it, but instead, yeah, do not stay in the war zone. In my opinion, Polaris design is better and more efficient as a combat ship in the game. In real life, having the bridge placed at a higher position will increase awareness around the ship, especially when the time that we were still using guns to blast at the other ships. But in Star Citizen, the only way to receive more information is to sit on the seats on the bridge, not looking out the window on the bridge with a binocular. Also, battles happen mostly in space or in the air, so placing the bridge above the hull will block the view towards the lower part of the ship and prevent people from tracking the targets. And having the defensive measures surrounding the bridge is something we would do in real life, because when the commanding staff or the ship's control were out of action, the ship will become a sitting duck. But in the game, at least for now in Star Citizen, the bridge is not a separate section for most of the ships except for some ships like the Caterpillar or the Endeavour. The bridge would not be gone unless the whole ship was being destroyed. For example, if your bridge was being hit by a size 10 railgun, your ship would be destroyed, of course, but not because of the glasses were being broken by the shell itself or the bridge was being destroyed by the shell. Instead, it would be the armor and the hull's HP was being reduced to 0 due to the shot. So as long as it can improve the effectiveness of your turrets on board, placing the bridge at the most dangerous part of the ship when under enemy fire is not a problem for me. Alright, so it's time to talk about the roles that the Polaris can perform. Firstly, it would be a ship for long-distance patrol. The Polaris is big enough to take a lot of supplies for the journey without returning to base very often. The armament and also the speed of the ship can allow you to deal with any kind of threats from chasing down the unorganized pirates to confronting a small fleet of big hostile vessels. Of course, if you found yourself facing a sizable invading force, your high speed will allow you to escape from the hostile as well. Secondly, the Polaris can be a commanding ship for a small fleet. Although the commander can be sitting on any kind of ship, but with better protection and also a larger size of crew, the Polaris allows the commander to focus on looking at the big picture in the battle and giving out the order instead of worrying about talking to the hostiles, because someone would be able to do the job for him or her. Also, the Polaris can provide a certain level of logistic support to friendly lighter craft like the light fighters between battles, which can increase the fleet capabilities to against enemy for a longer period of time. Thirdly, Polaris has a potential to become a ship for privateers as well. Since you got a brig on board, you and your crew can take the job as a bounty hunter to take care of the criminals in space, especially when you have an armory and a cargo bay that can fit light military ground vehicles inside of it, just like a Cyclone or Ursa rover. If you're worried about the casualties of your crew due to these kind of gunfight, then you don't need to concern that much, as there's a med bay on board that allows you to patch up your crew so that you can throw them back to the fire if it's needed. Acting as a blockade runner is also a good idea for the Polaris. With a high speed and strong firepower, Polaris can easily rip the hostile ships apart and throw off all the ships that try to pursue. While the large cargo capacity can allow the Polaris to carry enough supplies for the besieged location. Lastly, raiding probably would be the best job for the Polaris to do, as those size 10 torpedoes on board can make sure the hostile ships, outposts or fortifications to be destroyed in a short period of time, so that the Polaris don't need to stay in the area for too long and get away before those hostile reinforcements to show up. I know that some of you have started to ask me about the piracy, and my answer is Polaris is not really a good choice for this job. Since Polaris is a combat ship after all, it doesn't come up with any kind of ship-based tractor beam, which means part of the crew need to EVA in space in order to retrieve those valuable cargo from the targeted ships. I mean, if you can successfully stop them from running without overcoated with your armament on board. The process would take a long time that allows the hostile reinforcements, which should consist mostly of lighter crafts, to have enough time to catch you on sight. The radar of the Polaris indeed can provide early warning for your crew in space, but the high speed of the hostile lighter craft probably can close up the distance very quickly and start their attack run. Of course, even though the Polaris got a lighter armor and weaker shield compared to the other capital-sized combat vessels, it still got enough protection to take the beating from the lighter craft and use its turrets to take them down. But the critical thing is that your crew who is still outside in the vacuum of space probably will be sandwiched by the crossfire between your ship and the hostile lighter craft, as they are not being protected by the armor and shield of your ship after all. Also, as a stage of retrieving your crew in space makes the Polaris very vulnerable as well, as it will risk knocking down the crew who are floating back to the ship if it moves all of a sudden. So it means that if there are torpedoes or missiles that are coming from the hostile, you have no choice but to take the hit, or you may risk losing part of your crew if you try to dodge the attack. Yet, there may have some ways to overcome these kind of problems and increase your efficiency, such as storing a ship with a ship-based tractor beam like the Origin 315P, then you don't need to risk your crew's life that much during the process. For many people, including myself, it is no doubt that Polaris can get out of the fight alive even if it's being surrounded by the hostiles in most of the cases, of course. But the point is that need to spend a longer period of time on looting lead the Polaris have no choice but to face a fight when it's escaping, which is not ideal for piracy. In conclusion, RSI Polaris is a well-designed ship that can perform multiple roles in Star Citizen, at least on paper. Yet, no matter how things look good on this ship, Polaris is a capital-sized combat vessel that requires multiple crew members to operate. If you are a lone wolf player in the game, Polaris may not be a suitable ship for you. Also, as always, I suggest people not to rush to buy any concept ships, as these ships usually will have a higher chance of being changed according to the game development in the future, which is an unknown to most of us, which may also become something that you don't like anymore in the future. So, well, spending hundreds of dollars to something that you may not like, then it's not very ideal. So that's why I will suggest people to wait until it is flyable at least, to see someone flying it, to have a comment about it. Then at that time, you can consider whether you should buy it or not. And I can guarantee that when the Polaris is flyable, Star Citizen is still in alpha. So yeah, that is it for today's video. I know that there are many things I didn't cover and many things that may not be right. So if I say something wrong or maybe I have something to improve, then feel free to leave a comment down below. So I shall see you guys next time then. Bye bye.